Have you ever felt like you're carrying an invisible burden, something that holds your heart and mind hostage? It might be fear, expectations, or simply attachments you can't let go of. But have you ever asked yourself, what is the real key to finding true freedom? Welcome to Life Lessons, where we explore profound Buddhist teachings that help you live a peaceful, balanced life with inner freedom. In today's world of constant demands, we often feel like we're carrying an invisible weight, a weight of desires, expectations, fears, and especially attachments. Sometimes, we think that true freedom and happiness come from achieving what we want or reaching our goals. But what if the truth is that the key to finding true freedom isn't about holding on, but letting go? In this video, we'll explore Buddhist philosophy's deep wisdom about letting go, and how releasing attachments can lead to peace and freedom in your life. Stay with us as we uncover the art of finding freedom through letting go. Buddhism teaches that attachment is one of the root causes of suffering. When we hold on to things we cannot control, like possessions, relationships, or even our self-identity, we often feel incomplete or dissatisfied. So, letting go doesn't mean abandoning everything. But it means releasing attachment to things that aren't necessary, allowing us to live fully in the present moment. This doesn't mean that you need to give up everything in your life. Instead, Buddhism teaches that to achieve peace and freedom, we need to learn to not hold on to anything too tightly and to accept the inevitable changes that life brings. The concept of impermanence, anicca, one of the core principles of Buddhism, reminds us that everything changes and nothing lasts forever. Once we accept this, we stop fearing change and stop clinging to things that may eventually disappear. But how can we practice letting go in our daily lives? One simple way is through mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness helps us live in the present moment without being trapped by negative thoughts or emotions. When we let go of these distractions, we create space for peace and inner freedom. Just like a flower that doesn't cling to its stem, we simply need to open our hearts and release everything, accepting the changes that come our way and living fully in the now. If you found these lessons helpful and want to experience more peace and freedom in your life, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends and family. And subscribe to the Life Lessons channel for more content on mindfulness, spirituality, and Buddhist teachings. Thank you for joining us on this journey of finding freedom through letting go. May you find peace in every step you take. Part 1: Understanding the concept of letting go in Buddhism. In Buddhist teachings, the concept of letting go is not just a physical act, but a fundamental principle that leads to liberation from suffering. Buddha taught that attachment is one of the main causes of suffering. In fact, the Four Noble Truths, the core teachings of Buddha about suffering, reveal that clinging to everything, whether people, possessions, or ideas, creates a cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. Letting go is not just about loosening material things, it also involves letting go of mental and emotional attachments. Attachment and the Four Noble Truths. To understand the concept of letting go, we need to return to the Four Noble Truths, the basic teachings that Buddha shared. These Four Noble Truths include four important realities. 1. Suffering, dukkha. The first truth is about the existence of suffering. Everything in life carries some form of suffering. This doesn't mean life is all about unhappiness, but rather that nothing in this world is permanent, and nothing can bring us eternal satisfaction. 2. The cause of suffering, samadaya. The main cause of suffering is craving and attachment. We constantly desire things we like and fear losing what we have. We hold on to thoughts, relationships, possessions, and even our self-image. This creates suffering because these things are ever-changing and cannot be held on to forever. 3. The cessation of suffering, nirodha. Buddha pointed out that suffering can be ended by letting go of attachments. When we stop clinging to things that we can't control, we find peace and liberation. 4. The path leading to the cessation of suffering, magga. This is the Eightfold Path, which consists of teachings that help us free ourselves from suffering and reach enlightenment. The steps in the Eightfold Path help us develop mindfulness, wisdom, and compassion, all of which are centered around letting go and living in harmony with nature. Thus, the Four Noble Truths emphasize that suffering is unavoidable to some extent, but we can reduce it by understanding and practicing letting go. Letting go does not mean giving up everything. It means relinquishing attachment to things that are not essential, allowing us to live fully in the present moment. When we accept the impermanent nature of life, we free ourselves from the fear of losing what we love. Letting go is releasing mental and emotional attachments. When we talk about letting go, we're not only referring to material things such as money or possessions. In fact, letting go also includes releasing mental and emotional attachments. We often cling to negative emotions like anger, sadness, or even feelings of inadequacy. These emotions are also a form of attachment, a holding on to unwanted experiences that cause us stress and suffering. Letting go of emotions means acknowledging them without letting them control our lives. This doesn't mean suppressing our feelings, but learning to allow emotions to come and go without becoming overly attached to them. Buddha taught that when we see emotions as temporary and impermanent, we stop being swept away by them and can instead observe and understand them. Freedom and peace through letting go. One of the greatest benefits of letting go is that it leads to freedom and inner peace. When we stop clinging to things we can't control, we no longer have to live in constant fear and anxiety about losing them. Letting go does not mean losing, it means recognizing that everything we have is temporary. And instead of holding on to it tightly, we can live in the present, with gratitude and freedom. Practicing letting go helps us loosen the mind, reduce stress, and alleviate anxiety. When we're not attached to things beyond our control, we experience a sense of tranquility. Inner peace comes from within, and this is the true freedom that Buddhism teaches. Acceptance of impermanence. Letting go and accepting impermanence is one of the keys to finding peace. Impermanence, anicca, is the principle that all things in the world change, and nothing lasts forever. When we realize this impermanence, we stop clinging to things that are temporary. This doesn't mean we stop loving or appreciating the things around us, but rather we love without attachment. Accepting impermanence is how we learn to love without the fear of loss. When we understand that everything is subject to change, we can appreciate each moment without fearing that it will slip away. Letting go in Buddhism is not about abandoning everything. It is about relinquishing attachment to things that we cannot control and that are not eternal. When we let go, we feel lighter, freer, and more able to live fully in each moment. It is this letting go that leads to true freedom, helping us find peace in life. Part 2: The Role of Attachment in Suffering. In Buddhist philosophy, attachment is not limited to material possessions, it extends to expectations, desires, and even our beliefs about ourselves. In fact, attachment is deeply ingrained in the human experience, often guiding how we live and interact with the world around us. However, according to the teachings of the Buddha, attachment is the root of suffering, and understanding this is crucial to finding liberation from it. Attachment and the illusion of control. At its core, attachment is the desire to hold on to things, people, and experiences that are impermanent. Buddhism teaches that everything is in a constant state of change. What we experience today may not be the same tomorrow. We often find ourselves clinging to the idea of control, believing that we can shape our future based on our desires. But, as the Buddha wisely taught, attachment is the root of suffering. This attachment can take many forms. It can be material, such as clinging to wealth or possessions. It can also be emotional, as we attach our sense of self-worth to how others perceive us or how much love and validation we receive. But perhaps the most subtle form of attachment is mental attachment, when we become fixated on ideas or beliefs, such as the belief that happiness can only be found in success, or that our worth is dependent on external validation. For example, when we tie our happiness to achieving success in our careers, having the perfect relationship, or being admired by others. We set ourselves up for suffering. Why? Because all of these external circumstances are beyond our control. They are subject to change, and as time goes on, they may fluctuate or disappear entirely. When these things inevitably change or are lost, we experience pain, disappointment, and grief. As the Buddha said, attachment to transient things is the root cause of suffering. The cycle of desire and suffering. In Buddhist teachings, the cycle of craving and attachment is known as the cycle of samsara, the continuous cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. This cycle is driven by our desires and attachments. We constantly seek fulfillment through external sources, whether it be through physical pleasures, relationships, possessions, or recognition, but these things are impermanent and cannot bring lasting satisfaction. The Buddha observed that the more we crave, the more we suffer. Because the fulfillment of one desire often leads to the emergence of new desires. This endless cycle of craving and grasping creates a sense of dissatisfaction. Because nothing in the world is truly permanent. This dissatisfaction is the essence of what the Buddha referred to as dukkha, which is often translated as suffering. But also refers to any form of dissatisfaction or unease. When we seek happiness outside of ourselves, through external circumstances, we remain stuck in this cycle. Our happiness becomes tied to conditions that we cannot control, leading to anxiety, fear, and eventual disappointment. The more we try to control and cling to fleeting things, the more we increase our suffering. The freedom of letting go. The true path to freedom and peace, according to Buddhism, is found through the practice of letting go. Letting go is not about renouncing life or becoming indifferent to the world around us. Rather, it is about freeing ourselves from attachment, not allowing our happiness and well-being to be contingent upon external conditions. Through the practice of mindfulness and meditation, we can begin to see how attachment manifests in our lives. We can observe the desires, expectations, and mental habits that drive us to cling to certain things or ideas. When we become aware of these patterns, we can start to release them. Choosing instead to focus on the present moment and cultivate an inner peace that is not dependent on the changing circumstances of our lives. By letting go of attachment, we stop making our happiness conditional upon anything outside ourselves. Instead, we learn to cultivate a sense of contentment and peace within, regardless of what is happening in the external world. This practice of non-attachment allows us to accept life as it is, with all its ups and downs, and to find peace in the present moment. The Buddha's wisdom on attachment. As the Buddha taught in the Dhammapada, attachment leads to suffering, and the wise let go of attachment. When we allow ourselves to become attached to something, whether it be a material object, a relationship, or a belief, we bind ourselves to that thing. This creates a sense of ownership and control, which contradicts the natural flow of life. The more tightly we hold on, the more we suffer when things inevitably change. Letting go is not about detachment in the sense of not caring or not loving. It is about non-attachment, loving and caring for people and things, but without the desire to possess or control them. It means recognizing that everything, including ourselves, is impermanent. When we embrace impermanence, we are no longer attached to outcomes, and we can experience life more fully, with a sense of freedom. Surrendering to the flow of life. Surrendering to life's flow, as opposed to struggling against it, is one of the central teachings of Buddhism. This surrender is not weakness, but strength, the strength to face reality as it is, without resistance. Life will always be full of changes, challenges, and losses, but when we stop clinging to what we cannot control, we open ourselves to experiencing life as it unfolds. This is the essence of letting go. The practice of letting go leads to a profound sense of inner peace and freedom. When we stop clinging to our desires, fears, and attachments, we can live more fully and authentically. We can experience each moment with clarity and presence, without the weight of past regrets or future anxieties. In Buddhism, attachment is a major source of suffering, and the path to freedom lies in the practice of letting go. By recognizing and releasing attachments, we free ourselves from the endless cycle of desire and dissatisfaction. We can then find true peace, happiness, and freedom, not in external possessions or achievements, but within ourselves. Letting go allows us to accept life as it is, without resistance, and to experience true freedom in each moment. Through mindfulness and the wisdom of the Buddha, we can begin to release our attachments and find peace in the present moment. Part 3: The Power of Acceptance. In the teachings of Buddhism, acceptance is seen as a powerful tool for letting go of attachments and finding inner peace. It is through the practice of acceptance that we learn to flow with the changes in life rather than resist them. Acceptance does not mean resignation, but rather it is an active process of acknowledging and embracing the ever-changing nature of existence. Acceptance leads to freedom, freedom from the emotional burdens of resistance and the suffering caused by our attachment to things, people, or experiences that are beyond our control. The nature of impermanence, anicca. One of the core principles of Buddhist philosophy is impermanence or anicca. The Buddha taught that all things in the world are impermanent, nothing lasts forever. Whether it be our thoughts, emotions, relationships, or even our physical bodies. The world around us is in constant flux, and change is the only constant in our lives. The sooner we come to terms with the impermanent nature of life, the sooner we can find peace and freedom. The concept of impermanence applies to every aspect of our experience. The passing of time, the loss of loved ones, and even the changes in our own bodies and minds, these are all part of the natural cycle of existence. However, rather than seeing these changes as burdens or causes for anxiety, Buddhism encourages us to accept them with equanimity. By accepting that change is inevitable, we can release the fear and anxiety that arise from trying to hold on to things that are fleeting. The emotional cost of resistance. Resistance to change is a natural human response. When we face loss or change, we often try to hold on to what we have or what we once had. Whether it's a cherished relationship, a period of health, or an identity we've built for ourselves, we have a tendency to cling to these things. However, the more we cling, the more we set ourselves up for suffering. The Buddha taught that clinging to the impermanent leads to dukkha, suffering, the kind of suffering that comes from disappointment, fear, and frustration when things inevitably change or slip away. Resisting change takes a significant emotional toll. We spend energy fighting against reality, trying to turn back the clock or hold on to things that are no longer in our control. This resistance to the natural flow of life only causes greater emotional and mental anguish. The constant desire to prevent change or to avoid loss creates inner conflict and stress, which prevents us from finding peace. When we reject change or try to force life into a mold of our own making, we are fighting against the current of life itself. It is like trying to swim upstream in a powerful river, exhausting ourselves in the process. Instead of fighting, Buddhism invites us to learn to float with the current, trusting that the flow of life will carry us to where we need to go. Acceptance as the path to freedom. Acceptance, in Buddhism, is not a passive act of giving up or becoming resigned to fate. It is an active, conscious decision to embrace reality as it is. Acceptance means acknowledging that life is fluid and unpredictable, and instead of resisting this truth, we choose to accept and make peace with it. The Buddha taught that acceptance allows us to be at peace with whatever arises in our lives. When we accept that things will change, we stop clinging to the past and fearing the future. We can be present in the here and now, without anxiety about what might come or regret about what has passed. To accept impermanence is to liberate ourselves from the burden of resistance. When we accept that everything, including our own life, is temporary, we free ourselves from the need to control or hold on to things that are beyond our control. This freedom allows us to live with a sense of peace. Knowing that we do not need to possess or control anything in order to find happiness. Acceptance brings us into harmony with the present moment, the only moment that is real, the only moment we have. How acceptance leads to peace. Acceptance does not mean passivity, rather, it is an invitation to respond to life with mindfulness and equanimity. When we accept the impermanence of life, we stop resisting and fighting against what is. We can be with our emotions, our experiences, and our relationships without attachment. This openness to life's ebb and flow allows us to experience true peace, as we are no longer burdened by the weight of expectations, desires, and fears. Acceptance also brings clarity. When we let go of our resistance, we can see things as they truly are. We stop projecting our desires and fears onto the world, and we begin to experience life in its raw, unfiltered form. This clarity is liberating because it allows us to engage with life authentically. We are no longer controlled by our attachments or our fear of loss. Instead, we are free to live in a state of mindfulness, responding to each moment with awareness and presence. The freedom in letting go of control. The desire for control is one of the most common sources of suffering. We often feel the need to control people, situations, and outcomes in order to feel secure and comfortable. However, the more we try to control, the more we experience tension and stress. Control is ultimately an illusion. As the world is constantly changing, and we cannot predict or manipulate every aspect of life. The more we let go of the need for control, the more we experience freedom and peace. By embracing acceptance and letting go of our desire to control, we open ourselves to the natural flow of life. We stop trying to force life into a particular shape or timeline, and instead, we allow ourselves to be guided by the present moment. This freedom is liberating, it enables us to live with greater joy, serenity, and flexibility. We stop being slaves to our desires. And we start living in alignment with the rhythms of life. Living with impermanence. To live with impermanence is to live fully in the present moment. When we embrace the changing nature of life, we stop clinging to what has passed or worrying about what is to come. We learn to appreciate each moment as it is, without the need to hold on to it or make it last forever. This acceptance of change allows us to find joy in life, regardless of its unpredictability. The Buddha's teachings encourage us to live with awareness of impermanence. Recognizing that each moment is precious and fleeting. By embracing change, we learn to appreciate life's beauty in its imperfection, knowing that nothing is permanent. And that is what makes each moment meaningful. The practice of acceptance is one of the most transformative practices in Buddhism. By accepting the impermanent nature of life, we free ourselves from the suffering caused by attachment and resistance. Acceptance brings peace, clarity, and freedom. It allows us to be present with life as it is, without the need to control, cling, or resist. By embracing impermanence, we open ourselves to experiencing life more fully, with greater peace and joy. The more we accept life's ebb and flow, the more we find ourselves at ease with the world and with ourselves. Part 4, Letting Go of the Ego. In the teachings of Buddhism, letting go of the ego is one of the most profound and liberating practices. The ego is the part of ourselves that constantly seeks recognition, power, or superiority. It is the aspect of our being that feeds on comparisons, judgments, and desires, creating a continuous cycle of craving and pride. This attachment to the ego, the self, keeps us trapped in the illusions of separation, causing suffering and dissatisfaction. By understanding and letting go of the ego, we can experience a profound sense of freedom, humility, and interconnectedness with all beings. The illusion of the ego, anatta. One of the central teachings of Buddhism is the doctrine of anatta, or non-self. According to the Buddha, the ego is an illusion, it is not a permanent, fixed entity, but rather a collection of ever-changing thoughts, feelings, and experiences. We often identify ourselves with the roles we play, the achievements we accumulate, and the labels we carry. However, these external identifiers are transient and unreliable. The sense of I that we hold on to is not a solid, unchanging entity, but a mental construct, a collection of fleeting moments. The Buddha taught that we are not separate, independent beings, but are interdependent with the world around us. We are not isolated selves, but interconnected with others. This interconnectedness is part of the impermanent and ever-changing nature of existence. When we understand this, we realize that the self we cling to is not real. And the more we hold on to this illusion, the more we suffer. The root of suffering in the ego. Our attachment to the ego creates a sense of separation from others and the world. We start to view life through the lens of me versus them, my success versus their failure, and my needs versus their needs. This creates division and conflict, both within ourselves and with others. We become obsessed with preserving the image of ourselves as distinct and superior, leading to pride, jealousy, and even fear of losing what we have. The ego constantly feeds on comparison and competition. We feel insecure and restless, always seeking validation, approval, and external recognition. This attachment to the ego generates suffering because it is based on unstable, ever-changing factors that are beyond our control. As the Buddha taught, attachment to the ego is the root of suffering. When we identify ourselves too strongly with the ego, we become fragile, vulnerable to the fluctuations of the external world. Our happiness becomes dependent on circumstances and the opinions of others, which can never provide lasting fulfillment. The freedom in letting go of the ego. Letting go of the ego is not about rejecting the self entirely, but about freeing ourselves from the grip of attachment and identification. The practice of letting go of the ego allows us to reconnect with our true nature, which is grounded in compassion, wisdom, and humility. We begin to recognize that our true essence is not bound by the roles we play or the labels we carry. We are not our accomplishments, our failures, or our possessions. We are beings with inherent worth, equal in dignity and value to all other beings. In Buddhist practice, letting go of the ego involves cultivating humility and self-awareness. Instead of seeking validation or praise, we learn to simply be, without needing to prove anything to others or to ourselves. This does not mean becoming passive or indifferent, rather. It means living with a sense of inner peace and contentment, independent of external approval. We begin to appreciate ourselves and others without judgment or comparison. Recognizing that all beings are interconnected and equally deserving of compassion. The ego and attachment. Attachment to the ego often manifests as the desire to control, dominate, or manipulate situations or people to affirm our sense of self. We try to create a world that revolves around our desires and preferences, and when things don't go our way, we experience frustration, anger, or disappointment. Our attachment to the ego creates unnecessary tension as we try to hold on to things that are inherently transient. Buddhism teaches us that true freedom comes not from control or dominance, but from the ability to let go of our attachments. When we stop clinging to the ego and its desires, we can experience a deep sense of liberation. We no longer need to manipulate others or the world to feel validated. We can simply be present and experience life as it is, without judgment or the need to prove ourselves. Humility and compassion in letting go. When we let go of the ego, we make space for humility and compassion to flourish. Humility is the recognition that we are not superior to others, that we are not better, more important, or more deserving than anyone else. We are all interconnected, all part of the same fabric of life. Compassion arises when we stop seeing ourselves as separate from others, and instead recognize that everyone, including ourselves, is worthy of love, understanding, and kindness. Compassion is the natural outflow of letting go of the ego. When we stop focusing on ourselves and our own desires, We can begin to see the suffering of others more clearly. We become more attuned to their needs, struggles, and pain, and we naturally respond with kindness and care. The Buddha taught that true compassion arises when we see all beings as interconnected and deserving of love and respect. By letting go of the ego, we cultivate a heart that is open, free from judgment, and capable of deep empathy. The liberation of non-self. Ultimately, the practice of letting go of the ego leads to liberation, the liberation from the cycle of craving, suffering, and dissatisfaction. As we shed the layers of false self-identification, we uncover our true nature, which is pure, open, and free. The liberation of non-self is not about becoming less of who we are, but about becoming more deeply attuned to the truth of our existence. It is about experiencing life as it is, without the distortion of ego-driven desires and attachments. By practicing non-attachment to the ego, we open ourselves to the world as it is, without the filter of self-interest or judgment. We are free to engage with life fully, without fear or hesitation. We no longer need to seek approval or affirmation from the outside world. Instead, we find peace within ourselves, grounded in the knowledge that our true nature is not defined by the ego. Letting go of the ego is one of the most transformative practices in Buddhism. By understanding that the ego is an illusion, we free ourselves from the cycle of craving and suffering that arises from attachment to the self. This practice brings freedom, humility, and compassion into our lives. It allows us to experience life with greater clarity, peace, and wisdom. By letting go of the ego, we uncover the truth of our interconnectedness with all beings, and in doing so, we find true liberation. The more we release the ego, the more we open ourselves to the boundless freedom and peace that lies beyond the illusion of self. Part 5: Practical Ways to Practice Letting Go in Daily Life. In this section, we explore how to incorporate the deep teachings of Buddhism into everyday life through practical techniques that help us let go of attachment and cultivate inner peace. The Buddhist path is not just about understanding abstract concepts but also about applying them to our lives. Let's dive into several powerful practices that can guide us toward a life of freedom and tranquility. 1. Mindful meditation. Mindfulness meditation is one of the most profound practices for letting go, and it is foundational in Buddhist teachings. The practice is simple but powerful. We focus on our breath and observe the thoughts and sensations that arise in our mind without getting attached to them. Mindfulness, sati, is the ability to be present in the moment and fully aware of whatever is happening without judgment or attachment. It is about observing without trying to control. In meditation, when we notice thoughts or emotions arising, we acknowledge them without judgment and return to the breath. This helps us understand how much of our lives are governed by unconscious attachments to thoughts and emotions. Over time, mindfulness helps us realize that thoughts and feelings are fleeting. They arise, they stay for a while, and then they pass away. By cultivating mindfulness, we develop the ability to let go of thoughts and emotions, rather than becoming entangled in them. When we let go of our attachment to thoughts, we begin to experience the freedom that comes from being fully present in the now. The more we practice mindfulness, the more we learn that we are not our thoughts or emotions. They are simply phenomena passing through our awareness. With regular meditation practice, the mind becomes clearer and more serene. And we cultivate the ability to observe without attachment, returning to the present moment again and again. 2. Practice gratitude. Another powerful practice for letting go is gratitude. In Buddhism, practicing gratitude helps shift our focus from what is lacking in our lives to what we already have. The Buddha taught that we should not be attached to external conditions or desires, but instead appreciate the present moment and everything we have right now. When we practice gratitude, we stop fixating on what we don't have or what we wish to achieve, and instead we cherish the present. This helps us release attachment to future outcomes and desires, allowing us to be content with what is already here. For example, Instead of constantly longing for more material possessions or experiences, we take time to appreciate the simple things in life, the air we breathe, the warmth of the sun, the people we love. Gratitude helps us to let go of the sense of entitlement and dissatisfaction that often arises from attachment. It fosters an attitude of contentment and helps us develop a deep sense of peace with the present moment. By being grateful, we shift our mindset from one of longing and striving to one of acceptance and fulfillment. In Buddhism, this attitude is seen as key to transcending suffering and achieving inner peace. 3. Letting go of attachment to results. One of the most challenging forms of attachment is our attachment to specific outcomes or results. We often invest a lot of energy in hoping for particular results in our lives, whether it is in our career, relationships, or personal goals. However, this attachment to outcomes can lead to disappointment, anxiety, and frustration, especially when things do not go as planned. Buddhism teaches that attachment to the results of our actions is a major source of suffering. The key to freedom lies in focusing on the process, not the result. The Buddha encouraged his followers to perform their duties and actions with full commitment, but without attachment to the outcome. We should give our best effort. But we must also let go of any attachment to how things turn out. This doesn't mean that we stop caring about the results, but rather that we trust the process and allow outcomes to unfold naturally. For example, in our professional life, we may set goals and work hard, but instead of fixating on the specific outcome or the recognition we desire, we can focus on the effort itself. Appreciating the growth and learning that occurs along the way. Letting go of attachment to results frees us from the stress and frustration that often accompany unmet expectations. When we practice this, we learn to be content with the effort itself, knowing that whatever happens is simply part of the flow of life, not something we can control or force. 4. Letting go of negative emotions. One of the most effective ways to practice letting go is through our relationship with our emotions. Negative emotions such as anger, jealousy, fear, and resentment are often rooted in attachment. We may become attached to the idea of being right, to our grievances, or to our desire to avoid discomfort. Buddhism teaches that emotions are not inherently good or bad, they are simply natural responses to situations. However, when we cling to negative emotions and identify with them, they become a source of suffering. The Buddha taught that the key to emotional freedom is non-attachment, acknowledging our emotions without becoming trapped by them. When negative emotions arise, we can practice mindfulness by simply noticing them and observing them as they come and go. For example, if anger arises, we can notice the physical sensations in the body, tightness, heat, or tension, and observe the thoughts that accompany the anger. Instead of reacting immediately, we can take a step back and allow the emotion to flow through us without attaching a story or judgment to it. Non-identification with our emotions is a powerful form of letting go. Instead of thinking, I am angry, or I am afraid, we can say, anger is here, or fear is here. This subtle shift helps us create distance from the emotion, preventing it from controlling us. Just as clouds pass through the sky, emotions are temporary and will eventually dissipate. 5. Letting go of expectations. In life, expectations are often a source of disappointment and frustration. We expect people to act a certain way, outcomes to unfold as we wish, or our life to follow a predetermined path. When these expectations are not met, we experience dissatisfaction and suffering. Buddhism teaches us to let go of rigid expectations and accept things as they are. This doesn't mean that we stop planning or stop caring about outcomes, but rather that we accept that we cannot control everything. Life is unpredictable, and by letting go of our need for control, we open ourselves to the natural flow of events. This is closely tied to the concept of impermanence, anicca, everything is constantly changing, and nothing is fixed. When we embrace impermanence and release attachment to specific outcomes, we find freedom and peace in the present moment. Letting go is not a one-time event but a continuous practice that can bring profound freedom and peace into our lives. By incorporating mindfulness, gratitude, non-attachment to results, emotional awareness, and the release of expectations, we can begin to break free from the chains of attachment that cause suffering. Through these practices, we reconnect with our true nature, which is inherently peaceful, compassionate, and free. As we let go, we make space for greater love, wisdom, and understanding to fill our lives. Conclusion. Letting go, the path to liberation according to Buddhist teachings. In Buddhism, letting go is not about becoming indifferent or detached from life. But it is a journey of liberation from the control of attachments. Attachment is not just limited to material things, it also extends to expectations, desires, and even our beliefs about ourselves. When we let go, it doesn't mean abandoning life, but rather freeing ourselves from the burdens of cravings, fears, and the ego, those things that hinder us from living fully and freely in each moment. Buddhism teaches that attachment is the root of suffering. We constantly try to hold on to external things, such as possessions, relationships, or even ideas about ourselves. And when those things change or are lost, we experience pain. As the Buddha pointed out, when we attach ourselves to impermanent things, we create unnecessary fear and suffering. Everything we cling to is subject to change, and this is unavoidable. Therefore, letting go is the way to transcend the limitations of the ego, find peace within ourselves, and accept everything that comes without being trapped by resistance. The journey of letting go is an ongoing process. It is not a single event but a daily practice. It is about continuously becoming aware and observing what holds us back, and then learning to release it little by little. This can be done through mindfulness, meditation, and living in the present moment. We don't need to force a grand effort, but instead, we view letting go as a step-by-step, gentle, and gradual process. Letting go is not only about freeing ourselves from external things, but also from mental and emotional attachments. When we no longer cling to negative emotions like anger, anxiety, or jealousy, we will feel the lightness in our hearts. This is the liberation that Buddhism speaks of, the freedom that comes from not being controlled by external circumstances or internal emotions. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If you found these lessons helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Life Lessons channel to not miss out on videos about mindfulness, Buddhism, and spiritual growth. May you find freedom and peace in the art of letting go, and may your journey bring you closer to liberation, joy, and inner calm. Remember, the path of letting go is an ongoing process that allows you to become freer from the things that hold you back. Feel the lightness, the peace in every step, and experience life with a soul that is truly free.